I've played everything from transvestite maniacs to homosexual murderers to 17th century German mercenaries to Nazi officers in the Second World War. And people still say, oh, he's playing himself, you see. That's just why he's so good at it.
Oh dear God, he's preempting this review. Good evening, Cold War thriller fans, and welcome to a review of an early Pierce Brosnan starring vehicle, The Fourth Protocol. Originally released in cinemas in 1987, just a matter of weeks after Timothy Dalton debuted as James Bond in The Living Daylights. You know, the movie that Pierce Brosnan was the one originally signed to play James Bond in? Here, Brosnan is playing a KGB agent hell-bent on setting off an atomic bomb on UK soil. So I guess if you can't play the Cold War hero, you play the Cold War villain instead?
Yes, it's a rare antagonistic role for the actor and quite different to anything else that I've seen him play, but we'll get to his performance in a bit because the main hero of the thing is, of course, Michael Caine, who is here as John Preston, an MI5 officer who becomes entangled in a Russian plot to detonate a nuclear device next to an American Air Force base. This sounds awfully familiar.
I am more concerned about an atomic bomb exploding on a US Air Force base.
The Soviets hope this plot will drive a wedge between US-UK relations, and in charge of this dastardly mission is Pierce Brosnan's Major Valery Alexeyevich Petrovsky, who goes undercover as James Edward Ross and takes part in a variety of missions in order to construct the bomb on UK soil and therefore break the titular Fourth Protocol, a clause in a nuclear proliferation treaty that bans the non-conventional delivery of nuclear weapons. That's the plot in a nutshell. There are a variety of subplots and characters throughout the thing, including Caine's strained relationship with his superior, played with crusty vigour by Julian Glover. Ned Beatty is here as the Soviet general, and the wonderfully serpent-like Ian Richardson as a colleague of Michael Caine's in the security service. Seriously, if you haven't seen the British version of House of Cards, I can't recommend it enough on the back of Richardson alone. He's just such an incredible performer. If you told me that he was literally born a snake who was able to defy the laws of nature to appear human, I'd believe you. The film is based on a novel written by Frederick Forsyth, the writer of The Day of the Jackal and The Odessa File, and the author is also credited as one of the screenwriters and executive producers, and is indeed all over the bonus features on the DVD, so you do get a sense that he had quite a great sway over the final product.
On script, I know exactly what I want. How it's to be shot, that's down to John Mackenzie. And how it's to be produced will be down to Timothy Burrell, and I have two good pros there. I'm flying with them.
I do always find it a slightly iffy proposition, novelists working on screen adaptations of their own work. Obviously, writing a novel and writing a screenplay are two very different disciplines, and I think sometimes it's helpful for an adaptation, for a different screenwriter to come in and look at a novel and think, well, okay, for the sake of streamlining for a cinematic adventure, we can cut out this character, we can lose that subplot, we can tighten things up here and there. I need to confess up front that I have not read the book on which this film is based, but just from a purely cinematic perspective, I felt that this more or less held up pretty well.
That being said, I think that there are too many characters and sidebars that don't really end up amounting to much. The meat and potatoes of the thing is Pierce Brosnan is a KGB Michael Myers trying to get this bomb made and set off, and Michael Caine is trying his damnedest to work out what's going on and stop him. The tangents about the inner hierarchies of MI5 and the KGB and Pierce Brosnan making friends with his neighbours are less interesting, I would say. You know, I'm really glad that I'm coming to this after seeing another Cold War thriller so recently in The Hunt for Red October, a film that I did prefer and I think did a better job at keeping pace with the many different characters and finding the tension in the many discussions about plots and strained relationships. John McTiernan just has such an energy and intrigue to how he lays out the story, whereas the pace in The Fourth Protocol I found to be a bit lacking in some places. There were a couple of times I kind of just lost track of whose, side characters were even on. The code seems to be that if there's snow on screen, we're in Russia, and if there isn't, it's Britain.
However, I feel the film works best when it's just presenting suspenseful set pieces, or we're just watching Pierce Brosnan coldly and efficiently going about his character's business. I could probably sum this up by saying that I like the bits where people aren't talking. And that's certainly not to say that the dialogue is bad or anything like that. I just feel like the presentation of the the dialogue scenes just isn't quite as engaging as it might be if this were being directed by someone like John McTiernan from The Hunt for Red October.
One of my favourite scenes in the whole thing is the scene that actually introduces us to Michael Caine's character. We see him infiltrating a flat on New Year's Eve, and he's just using a variety of like grounded spy trickery and techniques to achieve his goal. I love this kind of thing, these kinds of little suspense set pieces. It's really nice, and just trying to think ahead of the character and think like, oh, how's he gonna do this? How's he gonna get out of this? And then seeing it pay off is just really nice. Michael Caine himself is giving a very Michael Caine performance here, and that's great. I mean, I love seeing him just do his thing on screen. I know that I opened this thing with a bit of a joke about his style of acting, and I do think that, I mean, obviously, he's a terrific actor, and he's given such a great variety of performance throughout his career, probably more than he's ever really given credit for, but here, I think he is doing what might be considered a traditional Michael Caine performance. And I'm certainly not saying that's a bad thing. I love this guy, and while he has been in some terrible films, he himself has never been a terrible presence. I'm just saying that, yeah, if you think of the stereotypical Michael Caine performance in your head, this is it. John Preston is quite a different character to the likes of Harry Palmer, who Caine, of course, famously played in The Ipcress File and its sequels. Preston is more of a wisecracker. He's a dad. In some ways, I think he's a bit more of an everyman kind of character. I think he's a good, solid hero, but John Preston, just as a character, is no Harry Palmer. I don't think he's quite as memorable. Completely stealing the limelight, as far as I'm concerned, is Pierce Brosnan as Petrovsky. Maybe it's just because it was such a shock to my system to see him play such a full-on psychotic, villainous character like this, but I was surprised at just how effective he was in this role. He has some fairly nasty things to do in this, and he plays it with such a reserve and quiet menace that's really effective. I say this with the greatest of affections. Obviously, if you watch this channel, you know I adore this man, but Brosnan can be a bit of a ham when he lets some of his lesser acting impulses run free, but here, whether through his own volition or that of the director, he is giving a minimalistic performance that works incredibly well, and especially given that this is handsome beyond all reason, charismatic hero type Pierce Brosnan, I think it's saying a lot that he manages to be quite so terrifying in this part, though I think Stephen Berkoff still ranks top of my list of mad Soviets trying to explode a nuclear bomb on an overseas US Air Force base for the glory of the Soviet Union. Elsewhere in the credits, I was pleasantly surprised to see Phil Mayhew pop up as cinematographer. The man would of course go on to photograph both GoldenEye and Casino Royale, and indeed I think that this is a very handsome looking film in an understated kind of way. It's not a glamorous spy film at all, it's definitely trying to be a bit more gritty, this could really happen type of thing, and I think it works well with that objective. In a lot of ways, I think that these kinds of films can be the hardest to review on a channel like this and make videos about because pretty good just isn't as extreme or sexy as really great or god-awful, but The Fourth Protocol, for me, is a pretty good, lazy Sunday afternoon spy thriller. It's a bit bloated in places, and there are some scenes that dragged it down for me, but when it's focused on its core plot, I think it does very well. It's hardly action-packed, but what flourishes there are work just fine, and there are a handful of suspenseful set pieces that I think work really well, particularly Caine's introductory scene that I mentioned earlier, and there's also a scene on the London Underground which I thought was very strong as well. Michael Caine provides a sturdy lead, but the real performance to watch out for is Brosnan's, and certainly if you're a Brosnan Bond fan, or just a fan of the man's work in general, you definitely have to see this one. He delivers a striking performance, and a very unusual one for him, something out of his usual wheelhouse, or certainly something that I haven't seen him do anything similar to. And then there's also just the added context of this being a relatively early starring film role for the actor, and at a time when the stars had aligned and then immediately imploded on him being James Bond, a character where he would have been taking out exactly the kinds of villains that he himself is playing in this film. It's just fascinating from that standpoint, and I'd say highly recommended to Bond fans, particularly on that basis alone.
Do let me know your thoughts on this film in the comments section below, and also let me know if there are any other early pre-Bond Pierce Brosnan films that I should check out to potentially review on this channel. I'm talking about The Fourth Protocol because it won the latest poll on my Patreon page. I put a few Pierce Brosnan movie options out to folks that support me on there, and this one won, but there are so many Brosnan films out there that I'm kind of dying to talk about, but there's also a lot that I've never seen before. I had seen The Fourth Protocol before, like way back when I was a kid, but I totally had forgotten most things about it. except for I remembered the ending, and I do remember Pierce Brosnan killing an awful lot of people, and at that point I found that to be quite jarring because I was just really getting into Bond, and seeing him be so cold and ruthless was like a bit of a shock to the system. But yeah, let me know if there are any other kind of like out of character roles for him that you think would make for interesting viewing. Also below you can click the subscribe and Mrs. Bell notification buttons to stay super up to date on future video uploads, and there are links to my various social media pages, including the aforementioned Patreon page and my Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Letterboxd pages as well, if you care to follow me on any of those platforms. And with all that being said, and until next time, Cold War fans, stay warm and so long for now.